Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Marvel's Avengers. I played it on the PS4, it's also available on the Xbox One and Google Stadia. Again, does anyone care about that one? It will be available on the Xbox Series X and PS5 eventually. So let's start out with the story, and the story goes, you start out as the Avengers on a day to celebrate the Avengers called A-Day, and they're also showing off their new power source of Terrigen, because, you know, if you know anything about comic books, Terrigen, totally safe stuff. But obviously things go wrong because, you know, it's comic book based and, you know, it's a video game, and Captain America freaking dies. The helicarrier crashes, all sorts of other problems, including the Terrigen mist, are released, creating the heroine of our story, Kamala Khan. And I'm gonna say this, while all the other Avengers, they are good, I like them as characters, I like what they bring to the story, they are very obviously based around the movie Avengers, more so than the comic book Avengers. Not in appearance, but we'll get to that later. That being said, Kamala Khan is the heart of this fucking game. I at no point in time really expected Kamala Khan to be just the star of it. And I mean that in more ways than one, which I will get into later. But she really is the heart of this game, and quite frankly, without her, without the writing behind her, I don't think this campaign would have worked or been as enjoyable as it was. That being said, I will say the story's a bit short, and I do think they could have done some bigger, better stuff with it. But I'll get into gameplay elements that I feel detracted from that. But overall, enjoyable. Let's get into the audio, where we'll start with the music, which it's good when it's there, but there's nowhere near enough of it. And I mean, it's good enough while it's there. It's nothing ultra memorable. It's nothing that makes you go, oh man, I need this in my life. It's an okay soundtrack, but there's a lot of time spent running around without any sound, which will tie into the sound effects department. When you're running around some of these areas, there's just nothing but the sound of you running. It sucks. When you're in combat, that is good. The sound effects there are really good. They're comic booky, but they're not overly ridiculous or cartoony. They work very well for the action that is going on, for the enemies, for the Avengers. I liked that. But the lack of ambient sound effects and music it's noticeable. Then you've got the voiceover work, which, I mean, gold star. You've got the holy trinity of voiceover work. Laura Bailey, Nolan North, and Troy Baker. I mean, of course, they're all phenomenal. And I'll probably get this wrong, but Sandra Saad, I think that is, she does wonderful work as Kamala Khan. Like I said, Kamala Khan is the heart of the story, and she brings that to life. Everyone else who lends their voices to this does a good job, but I will say they land a little on the generic side, but maybe that's just because we haven't heard enough of them. But that being said, the quality of their work is unarguably good. Now we will get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot. This is a third-person action looter beat-em-up. Not quite RPG, but kind of RPG. It is very much not an open world. There are some more open areas, but everything is very mission structured. You go from hub to mission, and sometimes the hub can be the Quinjet, so you can basically jump from mission to mission. You can do a bit of multiplayer during the campaign, but most of the multiplayer comes in after the campaign, and it's still very much mission driven at the time, but it kind of feels like a discount The Division. But the post-campaign stuff very much feels like that, where, you know, you're just going mission to mission, trying to gather new gear, max out your characters. The story elements behind that and the story behind the missions, it's very minimal. You can look at it if you want, but you don't see much of the effect of it. And that's where I'm going to start kind of bashing the game, because I feel like their focus on that really diminished from the campaign. It just sucks the life out of the campaign a bit, because you know there could have been so much more there. And while it is a good campaign, it's a decent length, I enjoyed it. I will say the mission structure to it was very much setting up for the post-game stuff, which there's just not enough of, quite frankly, and it varies. And what I mean by it varies. Some of the missions are well done, some of them are not. There's definitely not enough of them. There's also not enough areas to go to, and some of the missions are like a whopping 5 minutes long, no joke, and some of them get up to like 15 minutes long, which that's a decent bite-sized chunk, but you just don't know all the time. I can definitely see where the groundwork is for this to expand. I hope they don't get too greedy with it, because they very easily could, and if they did, it would really drag the entire thing down if it's just like, give us money, give us money, give us money, and then we'll give you some content, but it's not going to be worth it. And unfortunately, I do see that a little bit with the way they do like the cosmetic costumes. You're like, oh, I could grind for the money for it, or I could just shell out my real money for it. Which, at least it's cosmetic, it doesn't really affect the game. I will say, I'm still going to complain a little bit more in the visuals about the loot system. While it works fine, and it does actually affect your characters, and you get plenty of it, I do still have some complaints. And let's talk about how each of the different characters plays, because it's very important, and they kind of divide into two camps. You have your AoE characters, and you have your direct attack characters. The characters who are more laser focused on one enemy at a time. And that includes Iron Man, Black Widow, and Thor. They're very much that, whereas the Hulk and Kamala Khan are much more the AoE. They're hitting all the people around them as well. And I gotta say, I enjoyed playing as the Hulk a lot more in the beta than I expected, but in the main game, Kamala Khan all the way. I thought she was the most fun to play as. And maybe that has something to do with the fact that she's my favorite character from this game, because she brought that heart and soul, but in general, I just enjoyed the way she fought. I would say my second favorite was probably Black Widow. I really liked the way she fought as well. Which is the thing I'm gonna say as well, is that while each of them has their class, essentially, they do play differently. Black Widow doesn't feel like a reskin of Iron Man. Iron Man doesn't feel like a reskin of Thor. Hulk and Kamala feel different enough, and there is enough difference in their attacks and their powers and how to use them to make each character feel unique, which is good in a game when you're playing multiplayer and say you wanted to be Iron Man, but somebody else already picked him and you can't. But let's get into the controls, which overall I really like the controls. I think they work very well, except for the first part that I am going to bitch about because I'm really fucking sick of it. The whole cursor thing in console games. I don't like it. It doesn't work as well as a mouse. I mean, it works okay, but it doesn't work as well as it could. And the other thing that could just fuck right off, is the holding down X or square to confirm things. X to confirm things in menus. Hold down square to open this box. It's fucking annoying. And I'm not specifically blaming the Avengers for it, because so many other games do it. I'm just fed up with it, and I really hope to not see it anymore, and I really didn't want to see it here, and I did. But let's get into the actual controls. I will say, I felt that the aiming worked considerably better in the actual game than the beta. I really didn't like it in the beta. It works very well, though, in the actual game. I will say the auto assist is... just because it's really inconsistent. Sometimes it does a great job helping you lock onto enemies, and other times it doesn't do shit. That being said, your attacks, your movement, your camera controls themselves, like moving it around, that is all very precise. It works very well. It's very responsive. I have no complaints there. When it comes to actually playing the game, I think the controls work very well. Now, let's get into the visuals, and I'm going to address that complaint that I was mentioning earlier, and that is that the loot has zero effect on your appearance. It's dumb that it doesn't. We've seen enough games where it does have an actual effect on your appearance, not just your stats, that it's like, why the hell couldn't they do that? We've seen other superhero games that have done that, not naming names, but, you know, it's a fighting game with superheroes. So I just think that's kind of a wasted element, because while it affects the gameplay, at this point it could affect the visuals. They just didn't do it. Beyond that, I will say I really do like the graphics. I like them bringing the comic book to life. I will say that, you know, some of the main characters seem a bit more generic, but again, like I said in my beta review, I think that may have more to do with the Marvel Cinematic Universe just existing, because after so long of that, we all have this kind of idea stuck in our brains for that, but these do fit the slightly more generic appearances that you find in the comic books. The world itself looks good, the enemies look good, I like their design, I think it's a pretty cool design for the robots and then the enemy uniforms, etc. I didn't unlock a bunch of cosmetics, but the ones I did unlock I really did like, especially Kamala's suit at the end, and I think a couple of the Tony Stark armors were really cool. But I will say, I do think the Hulk looked cool, and if you watch some of the loading screens, some of the detail that's in there is pretty impressive, but it just doesn't necessarily hold up with some of the best stuff that we have right now. It still looks good. So to wrap this up, I really actually did enjoy this game. I do have more than a few complaints about it. There's no arguing that. I definitely think there's a lot of improvement that can be made and hopefully will be made. And mostly by improvement, I mean content. More content would be great. And I hope they're not too greedy about it, because that could really destroy something that has a lot of potential. I think they've already taken away from some of the potential with some of their goals of that whole loot shooter idea. The whole games as a service concept kind of strips away from the campaign elements. But I will say, overall, I'm going to recommend it. I will say, however, that if you're not hardcore into Marvel and you know you're not really the most hardcore gamer, it's okay to wait a bit, wait for it to come down in price, maybe wait for some more content to come down, you know, some bundle. Okay, so in the comments down below, why don't you tell me Kamala Khan is your favorite, right? Because she should be your favorite, especially if you play this game. As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, and if you like what I'm doing in general, share, subscribe. Have a good one. In more than one words. Let's get into the audio, fucking words today, man. But the